Hey everyone, my name is Varsha Datta and I'm a security and compliance specialist with Google Cloud. And today I would like to talk to you about some of our newest products at Google, Recaptcha Enterprise. Before we go into Google's Recaptcha Enterprise product, let's talk a little bit about what a CAPTCHA is and what it does. A CAPTCHA is an acronym for completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. It's a type of challenge response test used in computing to determine whether a user is a human or not. Fairly straightforward, right? Not really. There are a lot of nuances that go into identifying a real user versus a bot, and Recaptcha Enterprise is a complete solution just built to do that and do this very well. Let's talk a little bit about some of these evolving threats that we've seen in the industry. Users are constantly under attack from credential stuffing, account takeovers, and fraud all the time. And it's really unique compared to protecting our own employees within the company because we have less control over the environment that our users are in. But they are as important to our business. We've seen that in 2018 alone, there were about 30 billion attempted logins with stolen credentials, and 29% of those breaches involved those stolen credentials. And an estimated 8% of revenue for many online businesses is lost to fraud every year. The problem is in the defense of these systems, especially when you go all the way to the users' computers, because it requires a lot of data and ability to protect at the client level in an environment that you do not control. As you can imagine, Google has a lot of experience in dealing with fraudulent activities on our platform. We have over 1 billion users each across all of these 9 different products, and we've only learned on how to better protect our users from fraud over the last few years. Just for some background, here at Google, we've been protecting our own systems with two spectacular technologies over the last decade. The first is Recaptcha, which defends more than 2 million websites from fraudulent bots. And the second one is a safe browsing technology, which defends over 3 billion devices from phishing and malware. Let's take a look at these products in detail. Some of the more common types of fraudulent attacks we see are account takeovers, synthetic accounts, false posts, fraudulent transactions, and money laundering. Recaptcha Enterprise is built upon the existing Recaptcha platform that most of us are familiar with. The goal of Recaptcha Enterprise is to defend against these various threats, including but not limited to scraping, fraud, and account takeovers. Now, we want to make it very difficult for those attackers to gain access to your business to consumer services and use them for malicious purposes. Most importantly, with Recaptcha Enterprise, we can do this while providing a frictionless experience to your users and customers. The product acts as a barrier that is placed in front of your web applications where actions can be taken to stop bots and fraudulent activities and while still allowing your users in. Now let's take a look at the evolution of Google's Recaptcha over the years. It got started with this squiggly bit of text that you're trying to read and enter. And as bots got better, our defenses had to evolve. And that's why you see these click boxes and crosswalks where the challenges have become a little bit more complex. And a lot of users actually have trouble in solving these, and it's not the best user experience either. Not only do we face threats from AI, but we also face threats from farming. A large number of groups of people are solving these challenges for fraudsters, and now it comes down to actually distinguishing the transactions from fraudulent versus non-fraudulent transactions, and not just humans to bots. The latest version of Recaptcha Enterprise is essentially a piece of JavaScript that interacts with the user and gives you a risk score to identify whether the transaction or the user interaction was a legitimate one or not. So this means no text boxes and no crosswalks, just a snippet of JavaScript that sits within your HTML pages, and there is no user interaction required for the JavaScript to start working, which means no friction from having to actually solve the challenge. It's also based on the user's behavioral analysis on your website. rather than relying on just one form of challenge on your webpage. So let's take a closer look at what's included within Recaptcha Enterprise. Now, if you're familiar with Recaptcha V3, the enterprise version includes a lot of all of V3 and a lot more. So it includes an enhanced risk score based mechanism, which is based on machine learning and is also more specific to your website than just generic bots. We also provide codes or reason codes that allow you to better understand why we are detecting a certain behavior as a bot or not. Now, as a customer, you also have the ability to use the annotation API to provide us feedback whether or not a certain risk score that we provided was a false positive versus a false negative. Now, remember that not all bots are good or bad. It really comes down to understanding your user behaviors and understanding what your business needs are. Now, with Recaptcha Enterprise, we also have mobile support with mobile SDKs for Android and iOS. We also have a new password leak detection mechanism that's in early access. We also have a two-factor authentication that can be implemented for potential fraudsters to further assert their identity on your website. And finally, since we are on the Google Cloud platform, we provide SLA and SLO and also the standard GCP terms. Now, since Recaptcha Enterprise actually looks at the user behavior and how they interact with the page and synchronously in the background, the Recaptcha servers formulate a risk score based on the anomalies that we have found on the website. Now, with the enterprise version, we are able to provide more granularity in these risk scores that range between 0 to 1, 0 being a bad actor and 1 being a good actor. Now, some bots actually have a bit of a gray area that we need to provide more details about. And that's why the enterprise version actually provides you a 10-pointer score which allows our customers to take more precise decisions on their website and how they want to apply these protections on their website. Now, as an example, you would almost always want to have a different level of protection and security around your high value pages like login or checkout rather than a homepage. Now, let's take a closer look at some of these risk identifiers or reason codes. We're working on adding more and more of these reason codes every day, but here are a few of them. Now, when a risk score is returned that matches any behaviors in this list and more, we are providing additional context in the form of reason codes that can assist you in tuning your responses to your users and identifying trends. Now, let's do a high level overview of how all of these parts work together. The page or the pages are actually embedded with the Recaptcha Enterprise. Now, you can either have it on one single page of your website, or it could be across all of your different pages on the website. The JavaScript will gather the necessary data required to process the risk score. And then that data is passed along as a tokenized element and encrypted to the end user. Now, the predicted web application will then receive that token when the user actually interacts with the website and then passes that token along over to the Recaptcha Enterprise server. And then once the Recaptcha Enterprise server is able to collect all of the parameters and analyze it and provide a risk score, it actually sends that risk score back to your infrastructure. Now, based on the score, you can actually make a decision whether or not you want to allow your user to continue. Now, the good news for current V3 users is that the implementation is quite similar across Recaptcha Enterprise and Recaptcha V3. So if you're already a V3 user, the transition is pretty much just a line to point to a Recaptcha Enterprise endpoint. So now that we have a risk score, what kind of action do we take? If a high risk score is returned, it's more likely that it's a real user and you would want to allow them to continue their journey on your website. Now, if it's a low risk score, depending on the reason code, you might want to take either a few types of actions. You might want to either reject that user entirely and block them on your website, or you might want to provide a further challenge like a two-factor authentication to allow that user to further assert their identity. Either way, you would want to log all of these actions for further analysis. Now, let's look at some success stories around Recaptcha Enterprise. Spotify was one of our earlier adopters of Recaptcha Enterprise. We all know Spotify and we love it. They were disruptors in the media industry and transformed how we listen to music. Some of the challenges that Spotify was facing included detection of bot traffic and threats such as credential stuffing and abuse on Spotify's website and apps. With Recaptcha Enterprise, they were not only able to effectively detect bot traffic, but also protect and defend against threats coming from these bots. Another great example is Empower Illinois. Empower Illinois is a statewide scholarship granting organization that was created in 2017 to serve children of Illinois through the state's tax credit scholarship program. Now, some of the challenges that they were facing was fraudulent application submissions and credential stuffing attacks by bots. With Recaptcha Enterprise, they were able to accurately detect bots and also create a safe passage for legitimate users and minimize the user friction on their website. Now let's take a look at Webrisk API. Webrisk API is a Google Cloud service that allows customer web applications to check URLs against Google's constantly updated list of unsafe web resources. Webrisk API helps defend against phishing links, malware links, spam links, amongst other malicious URLs. It acts as a barrier between fraudsters and customer website applications, protecting them from malicious URLs being posted on their website. Let's take a closer look at Webrisk API. We all know that URLs contain unsafe elements like phishing, malware, and unwanted software, and it's often impossible to find this before our users do. That's why we have Webrisk API, a new offering from GCP that enables any company to find unsafe URLs on their website. Now, Webrisk includes data on more than 1 million unsafe URLs and uses Google's safe browsing technology to defend against malicious URLs. Now, let's take a look at how Webrisk API actually works. Assume that attackers are trying to exploit the Acme reviews by posting unsafe links onto an event submission feature page. To defend their users and the site against these kind of attacks, Acme decides to use the Webrisk API to filter all incoming posts for unsafe content. Acme needs to essentially extract those URLs from the posts and send them to Webrisk API, where and a Webrisk API will be able to identify whether a URL is unsafe or not. Now, depending on the decision that Webrisk API makes, Acme can then decide to either post or not post those URLs on their website. Now, let's look into some of these threat categories. Webrisk API also provides information on why a certain URL was deemed malicious based on some of the mentioned threat types on the screen here. Now, this allows customers to take a more educated decision on whether or not to block these malicious URLs. Now, here's a remediation response. For example, let's take a look at the sample workflow for Webrisk API. Once the API returns the result, if the URL is not a malicious one, our customers can choose to allow the link to be then utilized on their website. But if the URL is malicious, the customer can either decide to block the access to the website entirely by using something like a web proxy, or flag the post as a malicious post, or even block the post entirely from being submitted on the website. Either way, logging these activities is always a good practice to allow scope for future analysis. Now that you've heard all the awesomeness about Recaptcha Enterprise and Webrisk API, it's time to take action. If you're facing any issues regarding your fraudulent activities on the website, we can help you with it. Please reach out at cloud.google.com/Recaptcha Enterprise and cloud.google.com/Webrisk and get in touch with our sales and technical teams to help protect your website. Thank you for tuning in today.